accurately. The instrument is real, and it is finely calibrated, and the calibrations cost you a great deal to develop. But an instrument that was forged under conditions of necessity carries the heat of those conditions inside its metal forever. You can use the instrument, and you can love the instrument, and you can be grateful for what it has shown you, and you can still acknowledge that the forge was not chosen. There is something else I want to set down before this first hour ends, because it is the floor on which everything else will stand. The exile you live in is not merely social, it is structural. It is built into how the seeing itself works. Consider what happens when you walk into a room and immediately register that the woman in the corner is concealing something painful. The registration is instantaneous, but the registration also separates you from her, because she does not know you have seen, and she would not wish for you to have seen. And the politeness of human life requires you to pretend you have not seen what you have already seen. So now there is a small lie between you, a small distance. Multiply this by every room you have entered in 40 years. The exile is not an event, it is an accumulation. It is the sum of all the small distances that opened the moment your perception arrived where your perception was not invited. And here is where the matter becomes more difficult, because most of what is said about people of your kind, in books, in the magazines that line the shelves of stations, in the small luminous rectangles people now carry in their pockets, most of what is said treats this exile as a problem to be solved, as if the answer were to find your tribe, to find the other empaths, to find the people who see what you see. I have watched many people exhaust themselves searching for this tribe, traveling great distances, joining circles and groups and communities that promised recognition, only to discover that even there, even among those who used the same vocabulary, the exile did not lift. They came home heavier than they had left, and they concluded that they were defective in some new way, that even among their own, they could not belong. But the conclusion is wrong. The exile is not the absence of a tribe. The exile is the cost of the position, and no tribe, however well-meaning, can relieve a sentry who has not yet understood that she is one. The sentry must first know that she is at a post. She must first know that the post was assigned. She must first know that she has the authority, though no one has ever told her this, to ask whether the post is still needed, whether the war is still on, whether anyone is in fact still inside the room she has been guarding for 40 years, or whether the room has been empty for a long time and only her vigilance remains, faithful and magnificent and unnecessary. This is the proposition I will be unfolding in the hours we have together, that what you have been calling the burden of seeing is in truth the unrelieved duty of a watch that was never officially ended, that the exile you live in is the architecture of the post itself, and that the work in front of you, if there is work in front of you, and I think there is not to see less, and not to feel less, and not to find your people. The work is to walk slowly toward the door of the room you have been guarding, and to look inside, and to discover perhaps for the first time what is actually there. I will say no more for now. There is more here, but it must come in its time. Now I want to take up the thing you have most likely been told about your condition, and to set it gently aside, not because it is false, but because it is incomplete in a way that has cost you another decade of confusion. You have been told in many languages and in many rooms that you are sensitive, that you are highly attuned, that you have a nervous system more porous than most, that you absorb the emotions of others the way certain stones absorb water. The framework offered to you has been almost entirely a framework of input, of what comes in, and the remedies offered to you have followed from that framing. Protect your energy, set boundaries, limit your exposure, cleanse yourself after encounters with difficult people. Learn to discern what is yours and what is not yours. I do not wish to mock this language, because some of it contains real practical wisdom, and the people who have offered it to you were often trying, with the tools they had, to ease something they could see was hurting you. But the language is built on a fundamental mistranslation, and until the mistranslation is corrected, no remedy built upon it will hold. The mistranslation is this: it treats you as a receiver, a vessel that is too open, a membrane that is too thin, and so the cure becomes a project of closing, of thickening the membrane, of fortifying the vessel, of becoming in some measured way less of what you are. Many of you have tried this. Many of you have built elaborate practices around the work of closing, and many of you have discovered, to your sorrow, that the closing does not actually close. It only adds a layer of exhaustion to the original exhaustion. This is because the seeing you do is not, in its essence, an act of reception. It is an act of work. Active, sustained, skilled work. The kind of work a translator does. The kind of work a watchman does. The kind of work a tuner of pianos does when he leans his ear against the wood and listens for the small wrongness in a single string among many. You are not absorbing the room. You are reading the room. There is an immense difference between these two operations. And the entire literature of your condition has, with the best of intentions, confused them. A receiver is passive. A reader is active. A receiver can be protected by thicker walls. A reader cannot be protected by thicker walls. Because the reading is not happening to the reader. The reader is doing the reading. To stop the reading, the reader would have to stop the reading. And the reader cannot stop, because the reading is not a choice. It was never a choice. It is the executed habit of a very early decision, a decision made before you had language, before you had a self in the ordinary sense, that the safety of the household depended on someone, keeping a continuous report on the inner weather of the people in it, that someone was you. And so the reading began, and it has not stopped, because no one has ever told the reader that she may stop, and the reader does not know she is reading. She thinks she is breathing. This is the first thing I would correct in what you have been told. You are not too open. You are working too hard. The fatigue you feel after a gathering is not the fatigue of absorption. It is the fatigue of a skilled and uninterrupted labor that has been mistaken, by you and by you everyone around you, for simply being who you are. You would not tell a translator working a 6-hour conference that she ought to be less open to language. You would tell her she has been working hard, and that the work has tired her, and that she ought to rest, and the rest she needs is not the rest of closing, it is the rest of being relieved. There is no remedy that helps you that does not begin with this distinction. None. I want to say something now about what is called diagnosis, because in this age I understand it has become very common for people of your kind to gather names for themselves, to be told they have one thing or another thing, or a small constellation of things, each with its initials, each with its protocol. I will not speak against the names. The names sometimes help. They give a person a place to stand for the first time, and a place to stand is not a small gift. But I want to point to something the names do not quite see. A diagnostic name treats the condition as if it began inside the person, as if the person produced the symptom, as if, were the person constituted differently, the symptom would not have arisen. This is, in some narrow technical sense, sometimes true, but it is in a much larger sense almost always false. What you have been calling pathology was not pathology, it was loyalty, astonishing, exhausting, lifelong loyalty. To a household that needed a sentry, to a parent who could not regulate herself, to a father whose grief was too large to be borne by him alone, to a sibling who would have come apart had no one been watching. The symptom did not begin in you. The symptom is your end of a much older arrangement. To treat it as if it began in you is to ask the wrong question forever. The right question, and it is a harder question, and it is the one I would have you sit with, is not, what is wrong with me? The right question is, whom have I been carrying, and at what cost, and by what arrangement that I never agreed to in any waking moment? When this question is asked, and asked seriously, something begins to shift. The shift is not pleasant at first. There is in fact a particular grief that opens here, because to ask whom you have been carrying is to admit that you have been carrying, and to admit that you have been carrying is to confront the fact that no one asked you whether you wished to, and no one for the most part has ever thanked you. You have been performing for decades an invisible labor that the household relied upon, and never named. To see this is to feel, for a time, very angry, or very sad, or both. This is to be expected. I would not have you skip this part. The skipping of this part is what produces the dry, brittle, spiritualized version of your kind, that one meets in certain circles, the person who has read all the books, who uses all the correct words, who has bypassed her own ordinary human anger by translating it directly into transcendence. I do not trust this person. I have rarely seen her come to ground. I tried, in a book I wrote long ago on the relationship between the ego and the unconscious, to set down something about the way an inner figure that has not been recognized begins to govern a life from beneath. The book was difficult, and few read it well, even at the time, but the essential matter is this. Anything in the psyche that is not seen, that is not named, that is not given its proper weight, does not therefore stop operating. It operates, and it operates with great force, and it operates with the particular cunning of the unseen, which is that it dresses itself in the clothes of fate. You come to believe that what is happening is simply how life is. You come to believe that the tiredness is your nature. You come to believe that the exile is your character. You come to believe that the relentless reading of rooms is the price of being who you are. None of this is fate. All of it is the operation of a contract that was signed under duress by a small child who had no other options, and that has remained in force only because no adult version of you has ever known. She had the authority to renegotiate. I said then, and I have not yet found a way to say it more accurately, until a person makes the unconscious conscious, it will direct her life, and she will call it fate. Notice the small precision of that last word. She will call it fate. The unconscious does not announce itself as the unconscious. It announces itself as the way things are, as the world, as you. The work of recognizing that what you have been calling your life is in fact a particular structure assembled long ago by a small person doing her best under conditions she did not author. This work is the beginning of any real freedom, not the rearranging of the outer house, not the cleansing of the energy field, not the finding of the tribe, the patient excavation of the original contract, and the discovery, written nowhere, that there was always an authority to revise it. Here, then, is the first reframe I would offer you, and I would have you sit with it before we go further. The exile you live in is not the result of being too open. It is the geography of a post you accepted before you could read or write. The fatigue you carry is not the cost of absorption. It is the wage of an uninterrupted labor. The diagnostic names you may have collected are not wrong, but they are downstream. They describe the shape of what you have been doing. They do not describe what you have been doing, or for whom, or why. And until the why is understood, no number of accurate downstream names will give you back your hours. I will say this once more, because it is the load-bearing wall of everything that follows. What you have been calling your sensitivity is the visible part of a much older arrangement. What you have been calling your exile is the architecture of the post itself. And what you have been calling pathology was, all along, the most loyal thing you have ever done. We will turn now, in the next hour, to the deeper machinery of this loyalty, to how it organizes not only your tiredness, but your relationships, your loves, your work, and the strange recurring shapes of your life. I want to be careful here, because the next room is darker, but you have stood at thresholds your entire life. You will not be afraid of one more. Let us go now into the deeper room, the one I have been circling. I want to describe to you the actual machinery of what you have been doing, not the surface of it, not the names that have been given to it, but the mechanism itself, the way the gears engage. And I must warn you that some of what I will say in this hour will be uncomfortable, because it will require you to relinquish a certain flattering picture of yourself that has until now made the feistern bearable. The picture is this, that you are sensitive because you are, in some essential way, more finely made than the people around you, that your suffering is the cost of a higher organization, that you see what others cannot see because something in you is, by nature, more attuned to the real. This picture has comforted you in dark moments, and I will not insult the comfort it has provided, but it is, in the end, a flattering surface laid over a more difficult truth, and the more difficult truth is the door we must now open. The truth is that the seeing you do, and the carrying you do, and the exile that follows from both, these are not signs of higher organization. They are signs of a very specific kind of childhood arrangement, repeated so consistently and so early that it ceased to feel like an arrangement and began to feel like a self. In the household where you were formed, there was a particular kind of imbalance. One adult, perhaps both, perhaps in alternation, perhaps in collusion, could not bear his or her own inner weather. The weather was too large. The grief, or the rage, or the unspoken disappointment, or the slow despair, or the unmetabolized history of the generation before, was too heavy for the adult who carried it, and so it spilled into the room, into the silences at the table, into the precise way a door was closed in the evening, into the way one parent looked at the other, when something was about to be said, and then was not said. A child in such a household has two options, broadly speaking. The first is not to notice, to grow a thick skin early, to harden, to live inside the noise, the way a person who lives near a railway eventually stops hearing the trains. Many children take this option. They become the ones who later say, with some pride, that they were unaffected. They are often wrong about this. The noise has merely gone underground. But they are spared the second option, which was yours. The second option is to develop, very early, an exquisite apparatus for reading the weather of the adults, so that one may know at any given moment how to behave, how to hide, when to be small, when to be charming, when to be absent altogether. This apparatus is not, as I said earlier, a passive thing. It is an active skill, a continuously refined instrument of survival, and the child who develops it does so because the adults cannot regulate themselves, and someone in the system must do the regulating, or the system will tear. The child becomes, in effect, the regulator of adults who could not regulate themselves. This is the role you took. This is the post you accepted before you knew you were accepting anything. And here is where the matter becomes painful, and where I must ask you to set aside the more flattering version of the story. Your seeing is not, in its origin, a higher faculty. It is a survival adaptation of extraordinary refinement, developed under conditions that no child should ever face. The instrument is real. The instrument is precise. The instrument is, in its way, beautiful, as any highly developed thing is beautiful, but it was forged in a fire, and the fire was the inability of the adults around you to bear themselves, and the work of the instrument was originally the management of those adults, so that you might continue to exist in proximity to them. I knew a man. He came to me in late middle age, who described to me, over many months, a particular sensation he had carried since boyhood. He said that when he entered a room, even now, even decades after his mother had died, he could tell within a few seconds whether the people in the room were safe. He did not mean physically safe. He meant safe to be near. Safe in the sense that one could relax in their presence without later paying for it. And he had built his entire adult life around this capacity. He was admired for it. He was a man others sought out in difficult moments. He had a profession that drew upon this capacity, and he was very good at it. And yet when he came to me, he was tired in a way that he could not name. He was tired in the bones. He was tired in a way that no holiday could touch, and no sleep could relieve. And we worked, he and I, for a long time before he could see what I will now tell you. He saw that the capacity he had been admired for was the same capacity by which, at the age of 4, he had monitored the front door of his house for the sound of his father's footsteps, to know whether the man would come home angry or merely depressed. The instrument was the same instrument. The post was the same post. The household had ended 40 years before. The post had not. This is what I mean when I say the contract was not dissolved when the household dissolved. The household is a temporary arrangement. It ends. People die or move away or grow up, but the structure that was built in you by the household persists, because structures of the psyche do not know that time has passed. They know only that the work they were built to do has not yet been called complete. And so the work continues. The reading continues. The vigilance continues. You enter a room now, in your 40s or 50s or 60s, and the same apparatus that monitored your father's footsteps is monitoring the new colleague at the meeting, the friend of a friend at the dinner, the stranger at the bus stop. The apparatus does not distinguish. It cannot distinguish. It was not given a clock. And here is the contrarian thing I must say, because it is essential, and because no one will say it for me. If your seeing is a survival adaptation, then you cannot fight it. You cannot fight it because it is not your enemy. It is the very thing that kept you alive. And the body remembers this with a deep, wordless loyalty. Every attempt you have made to shut the instrument off, to harden, to become less sensitive, to thicken the membrane, every such attempt has failed, because the body will not allow it. The body knows that to shut off the instrument is to die. The body learned this when you were 3. The body has not been informed that the danger has passed, and so the instrument continues to operate with the full force of survival behind it, and you continue to be tired, and you continue to wonder,